Welcome aboard. This is the Admiral's Almanac, your leadership life connection, bringing leaders from all walks of life into yours so you can take charge, improve your leadership, and improve your life. With the wit and wisdom of your host, Rear Admiral Gary Hall.
And thank you for that great introduction, and welcome aboard to the Admiral's Almanac, where you can get updates on this episode and many other episodes at www.admiralsalmanac.com. You can also go there and send me a voicemail, and you might find yourself on one of our episodes. Today, I think we have a great episode on leadership. My guest today is Dr. Sanford Ehrlich, Ph.D., call sign Sandy. He's a professor emeritus and former Qualcomm Director of the Lavin Entrepreneurship Center in the Fowler College of Business at San Diego State University. Side note, SDSU is going to the Final Four for the first time in their history.
Go Aztecs.
Yeah, go Aztecs. Sandy's research and teaching is focused on leadership, entrepreneurial development. He's an angel investor. I don't know what that means. He's kind of a devil in my eyes. He's a startup company advisor, executive coach, and his consulting focuses on creating growth through effective implementation of change management and business strategies. Welcome aboard, Sandy.
Gary, it's a pleasure to be here today.
I'll flip over all the cards. Dr. Ehrlich has been a friend and advisor to me for about 30 years. We wound up meeting in San Diego, California. But if you wind the clock back 20 years before that, we were both in the same high school, Kenmore West Blue Devils. Now, before we get into the discussion of core values and leadership, let's go back to Kenmore West Blue Devils. Now, we never knew each other back then, and I went back and I looked at your yearbook, Sandy. You're starting to tremble. And the reason we didn't know each other back then is I was not in the Latin club, and you were. So,
that was because I was headed toward wanting to be an MD and thought that Latin would be a great thing for me.
It was then. It still is. Latin is a core competency, which none of our children are pursuing at this day and age. They'd rather be on TikTok. So think about back then when we were in Kenmore, New York, and we wound up meeting each other in San Diego, California. And I determined that was the neighborhood as far away as possible in that price range from Buffalo, New York. So tell me, what were you thinking in high school?
Absolutely.
When you graduated and ready to move on to college?
Well, I have to tell you, it's unusual when people talk to me about education, because I was someone, by the way, who wanted to escape education as much as possible. So really what I thought about in high school was traveling the world and having experiences with cultures and people from all over the world. My parents had a completely different idea in mind. My brother, by the way, had the exact same idea in mind, and he actually requested a leave of absence from Cornell University to do just that. But I went to college, and I was looking forward to being in the sciences and heading toward some type of profession, whether it was in chemistry, whether it was being a doctor, but doing something that was application of science and math.
So a great foundation with the spirit of education. But, you're now an outstanding world-renowned professor of business and leadership, but you certainly didn't start going in that route.
No, I didn't. As a matter of fact, I was headed in the direction of becoming a clinical psychologist. I received a master's degree. I worked in Children's Hospital of Buffalo in a very unique department called psychoendocrinology, and we were dealing with the psychological correlates of endocrine problems. And as you know, the endocrine system affects human behavior. So we were dealing with those issues. My mentors are actually outstanding professors in the Columbia Medical School today. They were very key to my thinking, not only about my career then, but also about my career now. They were not happy that I left clinical psychology and moved toward business, but my family background brought me there, as well as a relationship that I developed with a mentor at George Washington University. I was the only person in my master's program, again, heading toward being a therapist, that asked to take a course in the business school. And I took a course from a gentleman, Dr. Jerry Harvey, that really changed my life and changed my career.
Well, I think that's a great point, that at almost at any level, a teacher, professor, instructor can change your path completely. I know that happened to me early on, not at the college level. So you took that business course and that inspired you?
That inspired me because at the time, a lot of people had heard of Jerry Harvey. You may have heard of him. There was a moniker about business and about being basically alive called taking a trip to Abilene. I don't know if you recall that. A lot of companies would talk about, we don't want to take a trip to Abilene. And it was based on an organizational dynamics article that Dr. Jerry Harvey wrote. And the interesting thing, it's based in West Texas, and it's a story about going from Coleman, Texas, to Abilene, Texas on a hot and dusty day in an un-air-conditioned Buick, and not wanting to be there when you got to Abilene because you were quite comfortable sitting on the porch in Coleman, Texas. And this was something that actually happened to Jerry Harvey. From that experience, he wrote an article called The Abilene Paradox. And the Abilene Paradox was essentially about people who wind up taking trips to someone, somewhere, etc., where they basically agree that we don't want to go there, but nobody is willing to take the risk to share that agreement. And what that changed in my life was I was in a relationship with my girlfriend at the time and thinking about marriage. And he brought up many examples of marital situations when he was teaching, where students would come up to him at the end of class and say, I'm about to get married and I think I'm taking a trip to Abilene. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that we both agree this is probably not a good thing. We're not getting along with one another. Lots of areas where we disagree. But you know what? I think I should say something to my fiancée about it. But boy, her parents love me so much and they've put so much time into the wedding. And boy, my parents would be disappointed. So I'm going to go ahead with this wedding. And the other person is thinking exactly the same thing. They don't have a problem of managing disagreement. They have a problem of managing their agreement. The way this impacted me is I decided in my life, I wasn't going to take any trips to Abilene.
And I think that's a great analogy. And I am familiar with taking a trip to Abilene. And I believe I bet you can find it on YouTube because they made a film on that. And I think, yeah. And weren't they going for ice cream? I think they talked about somewhere in there. I know there's a story about ice cream.
Oh, it's all over. A movie about it. I think they were going to a cafeteria in Abilene for dinner, followed by ice cream. When they returned on the porch, Jerry said, wasn't that terrific? And his mother-in-law said, it wasn't terrific at all. As a matter of fact, I was real happy just sipping cold lemonade and thinking about dinner here. And all of a sudden, you suggested we go to Abilene. The father-in-law pipes in and goes, I didn't want to go to Abilene either. And his wife goes, I didn't want to go to Abilene. So people, organizations, couples, etc., take trips to Abilene, and it's usually because they don't share their agreement, and they don't share their agreement because they have a negative fantasy about what's going to occur if they do share their agreement. And that's where I think values comes in.
Yeah, and I think the lesson to be learned there is to speak up and speak your truth, and also to create an environment where you're willing to listen to other people's thoughts and opinions, regardless of their status in an organization.
Absolutely.
And because I think in my book, Navigating Leadership, I might talk about a young female sailor who had been in a lot of trouble, but was working up on the bridge. And there was an impending collision about to happen. And the only person that spoke up was this young woman, and nobody listened to her because she was a troublemaker. But at that moment, she was speaking the truth. And had they listened to her, they would have avoided a collision at sea. So you mentioned values. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's talk about core values. And when we talk about something like taking a trip to Abilene, what we're really talking about is if you're in a particular situation, the thing that really is a guardrail for you, the thing that really keeps you on the road, is values. And so a lot of people talk about values. Companies, for example, put values on fancy play cards. They put them on office memorabilia. They put them on walls. And what I want to make a key point of is that's not what is talking about core values. That's posting values. That's showing values, but it's really about 10% of the whole process. And some companies get it wrong because they think what we need to do is hire a consultant and have a consultant come up with a set of core values that everyone agrees to, because most values are very agreeable. If you say customer service, it's unlikely that you'll have anyone in a particular group say, I don't think we want to talk about customer service as our core value. So you don't hire a consultant to discover values. The values are operative within your company. All you have to do is go ask an employee. They'll tell you what your operative values are, and they'll probably tell you the processes that really demonstrate your operative values. So what I want to talk about is, how do you engage in the actions, the behaviors that demonstrate those values, and how do you build a corporate culture where when you onboard new employees, those new employees, they have to come with similar values, but they also have to understand and act upon your company's values.
Perfect. Earlier in my career, I came up with the thought process of the reverse proclamation rule. And that is, whatever a leader proclaims, usually you can assume the opposite is true. And one of those examples was a commanding officer that said, I'm a people person. My door is always open. Well, he was anything but a people person, and his door was never open. So I guess that's the difference between, signage that gives your core values and living your core values. So what are some of the examples of demonstrating your core values?
Let me give you a great example. When I taught in an executive MBA program, this was a program where presidents and vice presidents of companies come on weekends to get an MBA. Each time that I taught, and you appeared in one of those classes, I would co-teach with someone. And in one particular year, actually several years, I co-taught several classes with the chief financial officer of an international retailer. So this is a retailer that is one of the largest retailers in the world. And in this particular case, the CFO was talking about values. And he was talking about a story that had occurred to him when he was in the company. And he was in the company, by the way, at its founding. And so this was a story that occurred some point in its founding. And what it was if you are a very large retailer, if you're any retailer, you owe sales tax to every state in which you operate. In this particular case, one of the staff of this large retailer had forgot to send the sales tax into a particular state. Now, if you're collecting 8 to 10% sales tax on multi-million dollars of sales, you owe to that state a tremendous amount of money. Those states take it extremely serious. As a matter of fact, there's a company now called Avalara Corporation that is partially associated with a founder at San Diego State that helps companies collect its sales tax and determine they're in compliance with state tax laws. In this case, the person had forgot to send in the payment. He came to the CFO. He was a manager in charge of accounts payable and said, "We forgot to send in the payment." This particular CFO looked at him and said, "What should we do?" Now, this is an ethical dilemma. The CFO knows this could cost them a lot of money in fines. And the person who reports to him that caused the problem could also be fired, as well as the staff member that initially caused the problem. So this CFO looked at his employee and said, "What's the right thing to do?" And he looked at him and said, "Well," he goes jokingly, "I could try to backdate the postal meter and our payment would be on time." And he goes, "How late are we?" He said, "We're about 2 days late." He said, "What do you think we should do?" He said, "I think we should call our contact at the state tax board, tell them that we're a couple days late, tell them if needed, we'll put someone on a plane to deliver the check to you." Well, guess what happened? That's exactly what they did. The state tax board, according to the CFO, was surprised they received a call because this company had always been on time. And they said, "You know what? There's no penalty and just send it in by FedEx. That's fine." And he uses this story again and again and again to demonstrate at this particular company, we have honesty in all of our dealings with suppliers, with customers, etc. And this demonstrates, it's just one of the many stories in this spectacular company that demonstrates how you make values come alive.
People, a lot of times, they're just trying to protect themselves. We've heard, cover your six, things of that nature. But doing the right thing, stems the bleeding. If there's an issue and you try to evade or avoid or not do the right thing, it just snowballs and gains momentum and the damage gets worse and worse. So it's better to do the right thing right away as fast as possible because, as we say, bad news never gets better with time. And so do the right thing.
You bet. And when he tells this story in various leadership classes, he talks about the fact that when it first occurred, there were several junior staff members gathered around his office because, as you can expect, this is a big deal. And so they're watching him. They're looking at his reaction when this accounts manager talks about the fact that we screwed up. We forgot the tax payment. And he said he knew at that moment that this was going to go across the company. This was going to become a story, just one additional story about how this company pursues honesty. And he said, this is a company that always follows its values.
Absolutely. The other lesson in there is if you're in a position of influence, a position of leadership, more people are watching you than you realize.
Right. They're always watching you. And if you want to find out what someone thinks of a particular executive, all you have to do is ask the people that report to him or the employees who have heard about him or her, because they can tell you what this person's leadership is like, whether or not that person is self-aware.
So do the right thing. Know that people are watching.
Absolutely.
All right. Give me another example there, Dr. Ehrlich.
Well, another example, for about 15 years, I have served on the board of a company that is in the Midwest, a company called Nichols Corporation. I am no longer on the board, and the person I'm going to talk about is no longer the CEO because the company was acquired by a larger company called Imperial Dade Corporation. The company I'm going to give you an example of is Nichols Corporation. I became familiar with Nichols Corporation when I met its CEO and chairman, Michael Olthoff. Michael, very clearly to me, is a values-based leader. And when I met him, I could clearly see that everything he did in the company flowed from the company's values and his own personal values, which of course are a reflection of the company's values. Mr. Olthoff was not the founder of the company. His dad founded the company. The company is 87 years old. So one additional point that I want to make today is that if you build an effective organizational culture, a positive organizational culture that has the right set of values, you can have a company that outlives all of your competitors. And this is not a company that is a household name, yet probably most of the listeners have used their products because they're in the janitorial, sanitation, and packaging product business. So a lot of the cardboard that you receive from particular manufacturers was formed, and the engineers that designed it were at a company like Nichols Corporation. Now, what's very interesting about this company is quite a few years ago, Mr. Olthoff and his executive team worked with employees to really begin to restate what their values were. They always had values that were operative, but in many companies with great cultures, they don't post them, they don't talk of them, they just become operative because of the way people behave in the company. So many years ago, probably when stating core values was becoming popular, Mr. Olthoff decided, well, maybe we need to state our core values because this is probably the interesting or popular thing to do. But it was unnecessary at Nichols. As again, I want to make the point that it's not necessary that you have to have fancy wording of your values, et cetera. It's more important that the values are operative. And in many companies, someone has to come in and say, let's discover them and let's write about them so that we can onboard people. So in this particular company, one thing that they came up with I thought was fascinating is something called the 4 squares. So picture one large square divided horizontally and vertically into 4 smaller squares. And think of each of those squares as being key foundations of anyone's life. So what would those squares be? At Nichols Corporation, they are career is one square. Faith and community is another square, second square. Third square would be health. And I am blocking on the 4th square. And let me just get it.
I think what you're showing is a balance of life. So when you think of it, career, your faith and community, your health, I'm sure, I bet you the 4th one could be relationships, whether they be personal or professional.
Right. It's key. Exactly. It's what it is for Nichols Corporation is that they state within all of these domains of your life, you've got it, Gary, it's balance. It's how do you have balance across each of these 4 squares? And in terms of their values, it's how do you execute those values within each of those 4 squares? Because the values don't just live when you come to work. They live daily. So when you talk about family, Gary, and you talk about being present when you're with family, they talk about values like teamwork, values like innovation, that basically are executed within families as well. So how do you keep innovative as a family? How do you keep growing as a family? Because personal growth is incredibly important to this company. And they want their associates to be challenged. They want their associates to grow. And so they emphasize keeping balance among those values. By the way, before this podcast, I went to Indeed.com and I wanted to look at what employees of Nichols who have left Nichols. So in other words, many people leave because they're dissatisfied. I found several people who talked about the fact that Nichols Corporation lives by its values and that it encourages those values. So here's another way that they operate. Family is a very important part of those four squares. So if you have an engagement that you need to be at to see your child, they permit you to leave work. They want you to leave work. Of course, you're not going to be excused from the work that you have to do, but you're going to be permitted to leave because they believe that being at your child's event is critically important to your engagement in the family. Another point I want to make about a company like Nichols and other companies that I will talk about is that companies that have these types of cultures are not soft organizations. These are companies that hold people accountable. These are companies that strive for high performance. And basically, these are very strong performance-oriented companies. So you don't get away with murder because you're at one of these companies and, geez, we look very humanistic and kind. It's that we execute on our values and we stick to those values. The values are sacrosanct. The vision might change, the mission might change, the strategy might change, but the values stay the same.
That's a great point. And, I captured from what you just told us that personal values also influence your business values. So you can't say that we deal in honesty in all things in our business and then go home and try and cheat your neighbor, cheat on your taxes, or do something that isn't balanced and truthful. So I think also, if you're listening and you want to instill values or use values, I think you not only have to, turn them into action, but I think you need to write them down. These are our values, so that if an employee, like you say, is outside of those values, you can say, these are our values. You're not operating within those values. And so we're going to hold you accountable. And so being humanistic does not mean being soft on reality of the values of our business.
Yeah, typically what I have found in my own experience is that most companies that are values-based are companies that are typically holding people accountable, but people understand they're held accountable because these are companies that motivate people to want to be a part of them. These are companies where they provide purpose and meaning to people. And they're teaching things that people want to learn. And people understand when a company sticks to its values, when it reinforces its values, and when people who work in the company demonstrate those values, particularly top management.
So do you think the values that we've discussed and how to make them operational works in today's workforce? I mean, You've talked about hard manufacturing, things of that nature, and now we're getting into businesses of content creation, of artificial intelligence, work from home, or mixed work situations, or a blend of work at home, work in office. Could somebody listening say, "Oh gosh, the idea of values is outdated"? Does it translate to other organizations and through time?
Well, a lot of my work is with entrepreneurs and technology-based companies. And in those particular situations, as you know, there is a tremendous amount of discussion right now about how social media companies are influencing children, and they do influence adults, but we talk less about it, but certainly the influence on children. And the interesting thing that I've found, if you take a look at any of those companies, is there are a lot of employees within those companies that think they're headed in the wrong direction when it comes to the way that they're designing their algorithms to essentially tease children into spending more time on their platform. And in some of those cases, there are employees employees, when we talk about taking a risk, there are employees that have left those companies, are now consulting with the government. They're doing testimonies to talk about how these platforms have essentially designed themselves so that you stay on the platform. That's the intent. And that they have to become more values-based in terms of understanding where harm is done to children or, for that matter, adults.
Oh, absolutely. So developing an algorithm or a process to keep you on their content is basically controlling different parts of your brain. At least that's my humble opinion, in that you lose track of time. It's easy to go down a wormhole on Instagram or TikTok, and then you go, all right, an hour has passed. Is my brain now mush? Show me another dog talking. But yeah, it's we have challenges ahead in leadership and in business with this new era of artificial intelligence and social media.
Right, and it's really talking about what are the values that we hold dear with respect, for example, certainly as an American value, we hold privacy dear. So should these companies have more of an emphasis on the value of privacy and less of an emphasis on profit making as a result of, again, teasing children or others to spend more and more time on their platforms? And do people that work within these companies, many of whom, by the way, if you look at interviews, they state that when they went to join the company, so someone received a software engineering degree and they wanted to create great products, and they went to a company that's one of the top companies in social media to do just that. And when they got to the company, they realized, in one case of a testimony that I listened to, they felt they were designing poison for children. And so, am I doing the right thing here? Is this why I majored in software engineering? Now, I think these companies have to think about those types of things, and I think they have to resolve them. These are many great companies themselves. They pay handsome pay packages. They give great benefits to their employees. Their employees are generally treated well, but they have to get better in terms of thinking about the products and the platforms that they deliver, particularly to our children, especially with my background in child therapy.
And I think, your background in child therapy, that goes to that, my thought process of that a broad education, a liberal education affects you or can help you with technical issues, with leadership, with business development. So you might be an art major now, and it might be a perfect segue into business, into leadership, into manufacturing. So develop the whole brain. I think one of my concerns with content creation and things like that is that young people are making a lot of money, and how do we entice them into other businesses that are perishable skills? It's hard to get somebody to work for $15 an hour if they're making thousands a month with TikTok or Instagram reels, stuff like that. So, what are the challenges you think in businesses starting a company with obtaining youthful employees?
I actually don't really feel that it is a challenge in some ways, because at least from the teaching that I did in the past, I always felt that students come at it from the standpoint of having an interesting career, having a career that involves challenge. And I've generally found that if people enter a company that has a great culture, particularly millennials and Generation Z, they are very, very interested in what the culture and values of the company are. And more importantly, as I keep emphasizing, they're interested in the alignment between the values and the actions that they see people within the company exhibit. So if they see a company that walks the talk, and when the CEO gets up and talks to the company, they see a consistency with the values, not only in terms of the talk, but in terms of the walk. When they see that, and they see a company that they think contributes to their communities. Many of these companies, by the way, that are created by millennials and Generation Z, and for that matter, baby boomers, are now pairing every sale with giving some type of product, usually the product that they manufacture in poor communities around the world. Essentially, that's the foundation on which Tom's has been built. And Tom's, which makes various different products. Initially, when it made its shoes, and I believe it still does it today, it gives one pair of shoes to someone that needs them around the world. So if you have a company like that, and you walk the talk, I think it's actually easy to attract talent. Where I think millennials and Gen Z differ dramatically from baby boomers is that if you don't walk the talk, I'm going to become a quiet quitter. I'm going to walk out the door, and I'm not even going to tell you that I resigned.
Yes, and we see that often. So I think that if you lead with values, you want to lead in a way that others go, what is it that she has? I want it, and that's how they lead their life, lead it with balance, lead it with values. So if you're you're talking to a new company that's starting up and you're talking about values, what values, should you build? Are there like 10 values, pick 4, or, are there certain values that do the best in building a company in your experience? It's
interesting, Gary. In all the consulting that I've done, I have never once suggested a set of values to a company that's a startup, because typically it's very easy for the people in the room to come up with those values themselves. And I have found as a consultant, if I would suggest values, it just sounds like another consultant recommending something from some previous consulting assignment. I have found that if I put a senior team in a room that founded a company, and I've done this many, many times, and ask them, what do you think your values are? They immediately start arguing about some values, and we might spend some time talking about whether we want 5 values or 7 values or 3 values, and I always say it doesn't matter. What matters is how we're going to execute on them. So for the listeners that are out there, whether you're at an existing company or you're at a startup company, here's what I typically do, Gary, is let's say we list the value of customer service. What I want to spend 90% of our time on is not stating what customer service means in a very nice paragraph. I always say, we're not going to sit here and wordsmith this value. But what we are going to do is talk about what customer service means and how we're going to define it. So if we say that we value customers, and if a customer is dissatisfied with our product, we will take returns. Then when someone is on the front line of the company, whether they're calling about a piece of software they purchased, whether they're calling about their cell service, regardless of the company, regardless of the platform, regardless of the product, if the frontline person is not empowered to make a decision, then it's awfully hard to say that you value customer service. When you, as a customer, see people running up the pole to see who can make a decision, whether it's a $1,000 decision or a $10 decision, immediately as a customer you say, wow, they don't empower their employees. Do they really think that this person I'm talking to doesn't have the sensibility to make a decision on how to serve a customer? And of course, we see it as customers and we think it looks ridiculous. So it's really talking about, what do we mean by customer service? How quickly do we have any standard? I work with one company. They had a standard that anyone emails or calls, they must receive a response the same business day. And this was just sacrosanct within the company. Even if you have to say to the customer, we are working the issue, we can't get back to you immediately today on what our outcome is going to be, but we must be in contact with you. And in this particular company, by the way, which is unusual, but it happens in some companies, it had to be an actual person. It could not be a bot. And it could not be something where a customer could not reply. So in sitting in a meeting, these executives decided that if a customer contacts us, we don't want bots responding. We don't want to say that, don't reply to this because we're not listening. We want to have a customer. We want to have a contact, we want to have an associate. We want to have a contact's information, and a customer has to be able to contact that person. That's how we're going to execute on customer service.
One of the main points you made there was empowering, frontline employees. And I think empowerment leads to growth in, everybody wants to grow in an organization. And if you're empowered, you do better, rather than just becoming parrots of someone over you.
Let me give you another interesting example of a consulting assignment that I had. And what I found fascinating about this particular assignment, again, I have to leave the company confidential, but it is one of the largest trucking and air express companies in the world. What this company involved me with was a process they started before they ever hired me. So it wasn't that I led the process. In a sense, they led the process. I participated in the process. And what it was this company had made an acquisition. And after the acquisition, they were having lots of difficulties, basically because the company they acquired had a very different culture than the company that was the acquirer. And what it was that they were having customer issues. They were having issues with lost invoices. They were having issues with expenses. The chairman of the board decided to fly a cross-section of people in the company to a hotel in Dallas, Texas, and the entire senior management team, including the chairman and CEO, were sitting in a conference room in Dallas, Texas, with about, I'd say about 100 other people who eventually then spread out into small groups. And the small groups would have someone like a truck driver, as well as it could be the chief marketing officer. And the question was asked to these employees in a very simple way: what can we do to improve the company's customer service? Just a simple question. And my job was to go across these various groups, listen in on what was being said, record what was being said, and communicate it back to the chairman and CEO, because he was sitting in one group. He did not want to move around. He wanted to show that he was committed to this process, and that I don't want to be someone that's kind of getting up and looking at the process as if I'm not involved in the process. So you would be amazed at the things I heard in just 5 minutes. It didn't take an hour. It took 5 minutes. And heard something like, when a shipment is delayed to a customer, you say that we should get that shipment to the customer as fast as possible. The only problem is my terminal manager tells me that that's going to ruin their numbers for the quarter. So no, it's going to go to the customer on normal speed. But excuse me, it's already delayed 5 days. I don't care. We're not going to ruin the numbers. When I communicated that to the chairman and CEO, at the end of the day, in front of about 100 employees, he made a call on speakerphone to the headquarters and said, I want an immediate notice to go out to all employees of the company, all terminal managers, that from here on in, we do whatever it takes to get a shipment to customers as fast as possible. And the idea that your numbers will count against you was never existing in our company. So it may have come in from the company that they acquired, but it was very clearly communicated to the terminal managers in the acquired company. This is how we behave. And that's all you have to do is ask employees, how do we execute on our values? And they will tell you all day long what actions you take that are consistent with your values, and they will tell you what actions are inconsistent with your values.
Right. I think one of the points that you made, which is a good one, is participating in the process, being in the process. I think that's very important because, again, that shows that's just not lip service. Like I go back to, I'm a people person, and then you have nothing to do with people. So being involved in the process. And then the other great point is clear and concise and direct language and direction. So there's little to leave for interpretation by others. So communication, participation, and living your values in your personal life as well as in your business life. And I think you're on the right path to leading a company.
Gary, I'm glad you brought up personal life because I know that that's critical in your book, Navigating Leadership, and you provide a lot of excellent points on how to improve your personal life. Let me talk to your listeners for 1 second before we conclude about what it means to execute values in your personal life and how do you sit down with your family, how do you sit down with yourself and do this. What I suggest is you take out a piece of paper, 3x5 card, anything you want to take out, and begin to discuss and list what you think your values are. And in this case, as you raised before, I think it's incredibly useful to have a list of values, which, by the way, I should have said that I often present a list of values to the companies that I work with, but it's not to say you need to choose one of these 100 values, because you can go to Google and you can type in, give me a list of values that human society has always held dear, and you will get all kinds of lists. So if you just want to stimulate yourself on how do I say family is important, how do I say honesty, it's pretty easy, obviously, to just say honesty and family. But if for some people that have difficulty coming up with these things, there's all kinds of lists you can use. The more important thing is after you've listed your values, let's say you got 3 values on a page, is on put another half of that page, what are we going to do to execute on our values? So, for example, I met a gentleman one time who was a CEO of a company. He happened to be a great leader of a company, and so I valued almost anything he told me because he was such a great mentor to me. And he told me that he used to have weekly private breakfasts with each of his children. And he executed on this every single week. And he told me that sometimes he would wake up his child when they were teenagers and they'd go, "Oh, Dad, I don't want to go today. I'm tired." And he'd go, "Okay, great. No big deal. We won't do it this week." But he wanted to let them know that every single week, he had 3 children. Every single week, each of you is going to have breakfast with me so that you're going to get my full attention. I'm going to be present with you. And that's how he executed in one action on the value of family. So every single person that's listening can determine, how do I want to execute on my values? And how do I want to make sure that in my daily life, I'm living my values? Because I will tell you, I had a gastroenterologist when I worked at a hospital tell me, "Sandy, everything that's in the head winds up in the gut. So even if you think you're not under stress for a particular issue, disagreement, conflict, you are under stress and it's affecting your health." And so if you live your values, you'll come to the end of your life and you won't have a lot of regrets because you'll understand that your values aligned with your actions.
That's a great point. And stress does affect your gut. And so your gut sometimes can tell you when you're under stress and how to relieve that stress, which is usually talking about it and sharing with people you respect. So as we wrap up, we've been talking about core values in stating and making them operative. Where does core values get confused with a mission statement?
Well, a mission statement is what we want to accomplish in the markets that exist, in the product area that we sell in, et cetera. It's defining what we want to do. And oftentimes a mission stays very similar. It does not change over many years. What does change is the vision. The values are what make the mission operative. So in other words, we want to be the number one supplier of furniture products to the office industry. What does that mean to us in terms of being the number one supplier? Does it mean to us that we will have the best prices because value is one of our values? Does it mean to us that we'll have the highest quality because quality is one of our values? Does it mean that our logistics will be superior so that we deliver furniture to various corporations faster than any supplier? We can get them up and running in any facility quicker. It's really determining from your values, again, how you're going to execute. The mission is going to be where do you want to focus, in what markets, with what products, with what position within those markets.
You have given us tremendous insight and thoughts today. And so for those that are listening, if you go to www.admiralsalmanac.com, you'll see a little microphone down in the lower right-hand corner. You can click on that and you can send us a voicemail. Maybe it's a question for Dr. Ehrlich or me, and we can follow up, because this is a lot of intense and dense information you've supplied. And I think those that are thinking about mission statements and their values, whether it be personal or professional, you may have additional questions, any points you want us to clarify, and we'd be happy to do that. So, Dr. Ehrlich, call sign Sandy, any final comments or wrap up?
The only final comment I would make is, you just mentioned mission statement. One of the exercises I always had all executives do that were in my executive MBA class on leadership was write a personal mission statement. And so my last conclusion would be, look up personal mission statement on Google and start writing one. I've had one since I took Dr. Jerry Harvey's class in 1976. It was all tattered in my wallet. I had to recently reprint it, but it has really helped guide my life.
Not only Google, but try ChatGPT and query your question. Give me 5 good points for a personal mission statement, and you'll see what you get. But add a little bit of grain of salt with when you're using AI, and a little bit of your own reasonable thinking and education. So again, Dr. Ehrlich, world famous, world renowned professor of leadership, entrepreneurship, consultant to major companies. You've made a difference throughout your entire life, and I thank you for being a guest today. Thank you, Sandy. And until we meet again, here's wishing you a happy voyage home.
Thank you, Gary. It's been a pleasure.